On April 1, 2026, after more than 3 decades of silence, a brief but extraordinary statement from the Gila County Sheriff's Office reshaped the trajectory of a case long considered lost to time. In a formal release, investigators confirm it. After 32 years, Christina Marie Plante has been located alive. Investigators have confirmed her identity, and her status as a missing person has been officially resolved. For most cold cases, closure arrives in fragments, sometimes incomplete, often tragic. But this was different. Christina Marie Plante was not identified through remains, nor through a long-delayed forensic match. She was found alive. And with that single revelation, a case that began in uncertainty in 1994 became one of the rarest outcomes in American investigative history. 32 years is more than a timeline. It is a generational divide. When Christina disappeared on May 15, 1994, the world operated without the technological infrastructure that now defines modern investigations. There were no nationwide digital DNA databases as we know them today, no real-time data sharing between agencies, and limited tools for cross-referencing identities across jurisdictions. When she vanished, she did so into a system that was simply not equipped to find her. At the time, Christina was a young girl living in what many described as a quiet, mountainous region of Arizona. There was no immediate indication of violence, no confirmed witnesses who could reconstruct her last known movements, no physical evidence that clearly pointed investigators in a single direction. It was, from the beginning, a disappearance defined by absence rather than evidence. Despite these limitations, authorities responded with urgency. According to the official statement, extensive search efforts were conducted involving both local and regional resources. Law enforcement coordinated ground searches, canvassed nearby areas, and attempted to gather any trace of information that could explain her sudden disappearance. Christina was entered into national missing children databases, ensuring her case would remain visible beyond state lines. Missing person posters bearing her image were distributed across the region, throughout Arizona, and eventually nationwide. In those early days, hope was still active. Cases like Christina's often rely on time-sensitive leads, and investigators worked under the assumption that answers might emerge quickly. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into years, the leads diminished. The search shifted from immediate recovery to long-term investigation. Eventually, like so many others, her case became classified as a cold case. Active in status, but with no new direction. For decades, the file remained open, but quiet. It existed in databases, in archived reports, and in the memories of those who had once searched for her. For her family and community, the absence of answers created a different kind of burden. There was no definitive loss, but no resolution either. Only a question that refused to fade. What happened to Christina Marie Plante? The answer, it turns out, would not come from the past alone, but from the future of investigative science. In the same statement, authorities outlined the process that led to this unexpected breakthrough. Utilizing advances in technology, modern investigative techniques, and detailed case review, detectives developed new leads that ultimately led to a breakthrough. This sentence captures a transformation that has taken place over the past several decades. Cases once considered unsolvable are now being revisited with new tools. Tools capable of uncovering connections that were invisible in earlier eras. Digital records, enhanced identity verification systems, and improved inter-agency collaboration have redefined what is possible. In Christina's case, the breakthrough was not the result of a single discovery, but of persistence. Detectives revisited the original case file, re-examined existing information, and applied modern analytical methods to data that had once been static. What had once been a closed loop of unanswered questions became, slowly, a pathway toward identification. The significance of this cannot be overstated. As the Sheriff's Office emphasized, this case underscores the importance of cold case review initiatives and the impact of evolving technologies in bringing long-awaited answers to families and communities. Across the United States, thousands of families continue to wait for answers in missing person cases. Many of those cases date back decades, originating in an era where investigative limitations were far greater. Christina Marie Plante's case stands as a rare example of what can happen when those cases are not abandoned, but revisited. And yet, even as this announcement provides resolution, it also introduces new boundaries. In a deliberate and carefully worded decision, the Gila County Sheriff's Office stated that no further details would be released regarding Christina's current situation. Out of respect for Christina's privacy and well-being, the Sheriff's Office will not release additional details about her current whereabouts or circumstances. This choice reflects a balance between public interest and personal protection. After more than 3 decades out of public view, Christina is no longer simply a case file. She is an individual whose life, experiences, and circumstances remain her own. While the public may seek answers, the priority now shifts to her well-being. Still, the The absence of detail inevitably leads to renewed questions. Where has she been for 32 years? Was her disappearance voluntary or influenced by external factors? Were there missed opportunities in the original investigation that delayed this outcome? These questions remain unanswered, at least for now. But even without those answers, one truth stands clearly above all others: this case did not end in loss. It ended in discovery. In closing, the sheriff's office expressed gratitude to all those who contributed to keeping the case alive over the decades. The sheriff's office extends its gratitude to the investigators, analysts, partner agencies, and community members who contributed to keeping this case active over the decades. That acknowledgement highlights something essential. Cases like this are not solved by a single moment or a single individual. They are the result of sustained effort, of investigators who refuse to let files disappear, of analysts who continue to revisit old data, and of communities that keep names from being forgotten. 32 years ago, Christina Marie Plante vanished without explanation. Today, she has been found alive. And in that outcome lies not just the resolution of a case, but a reminder even the longest silences can, eventually, be broken. As of early April 2026, authorities from the Gila County Sheriff's Office have confirmed a development that fundamentally redefines the case of Christina Marie Plante. After more than 3 decades listed as a missing person, investigators have verified her identity with full certainty. Christina is now 44 years old, with a birth year estimated around 1981, and her identification has been confirmed through modern investigative processes conducted by the Cold Case Unit. According to officials, this confirmation meets the highest evidentiary standards currently used in long-term missing person cases, effectively resolving her status in national databases. Equally significant is her condition. Authorities have stated that Christina is alive and in stable health. She is currently residing within the United States, though under a different name, and her exact location has not been publicly disclosed. This decision, as emphasized by investigators, is not due to any ongoing threat or criminal concern, but rather a deliberate measure to protect her privacy and personal well-being. In cases of this nature, where an individual has re-established a life independent of their past identity, law enforcement agencies often prioritize autonomy and safety over public disclosure. One of the most critical findings in this case is the determination that Christina's disappearance in 1994 was voluntary. Investigators concluded that she left on her own initiative, without evidence of coercion, abduction, or external force. This conclusion is supported by newly developed leads and retrospective analysis of the original case file. Furthermore, authorities confirmed that she received assistance from an undisclosed family member at the time of her departure. While the identity of this individual has not been released, officials have indicated that this support played a role in enabling her to leave her previous environment. The underlying motivation for her decision appears to be rooted in personal circumstances. According to investigative findings, Christina was not content with her living situation at the time. Reports indicate that she was residing with extended family members, specifically an aunt and uncle, and that she experienced dissatisfaction or distress within that environment. While no criminal conduct has been associated with that household, investigators recognize that personal and emotional factors can significantly influence the decisions of adolescents, particularly in cases involving instability or perceived lack of support. From a behavioral and forensic perspective, this aligns with a known subset of long-term missing person cases categorized as voluntary juvenile disappearance. In such cases, individuals intentionally leave their known environment and actively avoid detection, sometimes for extended periods. What distinguishes Christina's case is not the initial act of leaving, but the duration and effectiveness of her absence. Maintaining a new identity for over 30 years without re-entry into official systems under her original name suggests a high level of adaptability and a sustained effort to remain separate from her past. When approached by investigators in the present day, Christina reportedly declined to provide detailed information regarding the intervening years. Authorities described her as not willing to cooperate with the details, and noted that she referred to her past as an old life. This response is not uncommon in cases where individuals have intentionally distanced themselves from earlier circumstances. From an investigative standpoint, her position introduces clear limits on what can be reconstructed or publicly understood about the time between 1994 and 2026. Importantly, law enforcement has made it clear that her lack of cooperation does not imply wrongdoing. There is no indication that Christina has been involved in criminal activity, nor that her disappearance concealed any offense. On the contrary, investigators have explicitly stated that there is no evidence of abduction, violence, or criminal exploitation at any stage of the case. As a result, no new criminal investigation has been initiated, and the case is considered closed in terms of missing person status. The decision to withhold further details reflects a broader principle within modern investigative practice. As stated by the Gila County Sheriff's Office, this approach is taken out of respect for Christina's privacy and well-being. After decades of absence, the priority shifts from public resolution to individual protection. Disclosing her current identity, location, or personal circumstances could expose her to unwanted attention or disrupt the life she has established. In cases where no crime has occurred, the rights of the individual take precedence over public curiosity. This outcome also highlights an important distinction in the classification of missing person cases. While many long-term disappearances involve unresolved or suspected criminal elements, a smaller subset ultimately reflects personal decisions made under complex circumstances. Christina Marie Plante's case now falls within that category. It serves as a reminder that not all disappearances follow a single narrative, and that assumptions made in the absence of evidence can persist for decades without verification. From a forensic and analytical standpoint, the resolution of this case underscores the evolving capabilities of law enforcement. Advances in identity verification, data integration, and interagency collaboration have made it possible to revisit cases once considered inactive. However, it also demonstrates the limitations of investigation when an individual chooses not to disclose their history. Even with full identification, the internal narrative of those 32 years remains largely inaccessible. Ultimately, the case of Christina Marie Plante is not defined by a criminal act, but by a prolonged absence shaped by personal choice. Her identification brings closure to the question of where she is, but not necessarily to the question of why she left or how she lived during that time. For investigators, the case is resolved. For observers, it remains a rare and complex example of how a missing person case can conclude without crime, yet still leave enduring questions about identity, autonomy, and the passage of time. In order to fully understand the circumstances surrounding Christina Marie Plante's disappearance in 1994, it is essential to examine the environment in which she was living at the time. Christina resided in the rural community of Star Valley, a small mountain area near Payson, located within Gila County. This region, positioned east of Phoenix, is characterized by its forested terrain, quiet neighborhoods, and relatively low population density. During the early 1990s, Star Valley was widely regarded as a peaceful and close-knit community. Residents often knew one another, and daily life moved at a slower pace compared to urban centers. Crime rates in the area were low, and incidents involving missing persons, particularly juveniles, were uncommon. This context is significant, as it shaped the initial perception of Christina's disappearance. In a setting where serious incidents were rare, the sudden vanishing of a young girl without clear explanation created both confusion and concern. At the time of her disappearance, Christina was not living with her biological parents, but with extended family members. She resided in the home of her aunt and uncle, with her uncle, Gary Plante, later identified as the individual who officially reported her missing. This detail became a central component of the early investigation, as law enforcement typically begins with immediate household contacts when reconstructing a missing person's last known circumstances. From an investigative standpoint, living arrangements involving extended family can introduce additional layers of complexity. While such arrangements are often stable and supportive, they may also reflect underlying family transitions, changes in guardianship, or personal adjustments for the child involved. In Christina's case, later findings suggest that her emotional state and level of comfort within this environment may have played a role in her decision to leave. However, it is important to note that no evidence of criminal behavior or misconduct has been associated with the household. Authorities have not identified any actions by family members that would indicate coercion, abuse, or direct involvement in her disappearance. Instead, the available information points toward internal, personal factors influencing her behavior rather than external threats. The broader community context also contributed to the difficulty of the investigation. In a small town like Star Valley, the absence of witnesses or suspicious activity is not unusual, particularly in areas where residents value privacy and where daily routines are less structured than in urban environments. This lack of immediate leads meant that investigators had limited starting points, increasing the likelihood that the case would eventually lose momentum. In retrospect, the combination of a quiet rural setting, limited forensic resources at the time, and a disappearance that did not initially present signs of foul play created conditions in which Christina could leave undetected. Understanding this context is essential, as it frames the case not as an anomaly of violence, but as a complex intersection of environment, family structure, and individual circumstance. On May 15, 1994, what began as an ordinary Sunday in the quiet mountain community of Star Valley would soon become the starting point of a mystery that would remain unresolved for over 3 decades. The timeline, as reconstructed by investigators, is both simple and deeply unsettling in its lack of detail. At approximately 12:30 p.m., Christina Marie Plante was last seen near her residence on Moonlight Drive, a modest road surrounded by trees, open land, and scattered homes typical of rural Gila County. The environment was calm, with no reported disturbances, no unusual activity, and no indication that anything out of the ordinary was about to occur. According to available information, Christina told those around her that she intended to take a short walk to visit a horse she cared about. The destination was familiar, located near the home, and the route was one she likely knew well. In small communities like Star Valley, such routines were not considered risky. Walking alone, especially during daylight hours, was a common and generally safe activity. Her clothing that day was casual and appropriate for the warm Arizona climate. She was described as wearing a white t-shirt, multi-colored shorts featuring red, yellow, and blue patterns, and black tennis shoes. These details, while seemingly minor, would later become critical identifiers in missing person reports, search efforts, and public appeals. They represented the last confirmed visual record of her before she disappeared. The final sighting of Christina places her walking alone, heading in the direction of the nearby horse area. There were no reports of anyone accompanying her, no vehicles observed following or approaching her, and no witnesses who could provide additional context about her movements beyond that point. From an investigative standpoint, this is where the timeline effectively ends. What happened next remains one of the most defining aspects of the case. Nothing. There were no signs of struggle, no physical evidence left behind along the route, no personal belongings recovered that could indicate interruption or distress, no confirmed sightings after she began her walk. In forensic terms, the scene offered no immediate indicators of foul play, but also no clues to support alternative explanations such as accident or voluntary departure at that exact moment. The phrase often used by investigators to describe this type of disappearance is, vanished without a trace. In Christina's case, that is not a simplification. It is an accurate reflection of the available evidence. She left her home in broad daylight, in a familiar area, and within a short distance of her intended destination, yet no verifiable trace of her presence was documented after that point. For law enforcement, such cases present a unique challenge. Typically, investigations rely on one of three elements: physical evidence, witness testimony, or digital transactional records. In 1994, the third category was minimal compared to today, leaving investigators heavily dependent on the first two. In Christina's case, both were effectively absent. The lack of witnesses is particularly notable given the time of day. Midday hours generally increase the likelihood of visibility, especially in residential areas. However, Star Valley's low population density meant that even during daylight, stretches of road could remain empty for extended periods. This environmental factor significantly reduced the chances of someone observing her final movements. Similarly, the absence of physical evidence limited the scope of early investigative theories. There were no indications of forced contact, no disturbances along the path she was believed to have taken, and no items recovered that could establish a secondary location or point of interest. Without these elements, investigators were left with a wide range of possibilities but no clear direction. Initial responses focused on search and recovery. Authorities conducted ground searches in the surrounding terrain, including wooded areas, open land, and locations near the horse enclosure she intended to visit. Volunteers from the community joined in these efforts, reflecting the urgency and concern generated by her disappearance. Despite these extensive searches, no new information emerged. From a modern forensic perspective, the disappearance highlights the limitations of investigative tools available at the time. Today, even a short walk could potentially be reconstructed through surveillance footage, digital footprints, or location data. In 1994, none of these resources were available. Once Christina left visual contact with those around her, there were no mechanisms in place to track her movements. The simplicity of her last known action stands in stark contrast to the complexity of the case that followed. A short walk, a familiar destination, a routine day. Yet from that moment forward, the narrative becomes undefined. Looking back with the benefit of current findings, investigators now understand that her disappearance was not the result of an immediate external event such as abduction or accident. However, at the time that distinction was not clear. The absence of evidence left all possibilities open, and for years, the question remained unchanged. How could someone disappear under such ordinary circumstances, in such a short span of time, without leaving any trace? May 15, 1994, remains the pivot point of the entire case. It marks the last confirmed moment Christina Marie Plante was seen as part of her known world. Everything that followed, decades of searching, unanswered questions, and eventual resolution, traces back to that single, quiet afternoon on Moonlight Drive, where a routine walk became the beginning of a 32-year mystery. The disappearance of Christina Marie Plante on May 15, 1994 triggered an immediate and coordinated response from both her family and the surrounding community. When it became clear that she had not returned from what was expected to be a short, routine walk, concern escalated quickly. Her uncle, Gary Plante, who was her legal guardian at the time, contacted local authorities without delay, initiating what would become a long-running missing person investigation. Deputies from the Gila County Sheriff's Office responded promptly, treating the case with urgency due to Christina's age and the unusual nature of her disappearance. Initial procedures focused on gathering critical information within the first hours: her last known location, her intended destination, her clothing, and any possible contacts she may have had prior to leaving. These early steps are often decisive in missing person cases, especially when time-sensitive leads are still viable. Simultaneously, the local community of Star Valley began mobilizing. In small rural areas, responses to incidents like this are often immediate and collective. Residents organized volunteer search groups, focusing on nearby forested areas, open land, and rugged terrain surrounding Moonlight Drive. These searches were conducted methodically, covering trails, properties, and locations where a young person might reasonably be found. The goal was clear: locate Christina as quickly as possible while the window for recovery remained open. As the search expanded, additional regional resources were brought in to assist. Law enforcement coordinated broader ground operations, while community members continued to support efforts on a local level. Missing person posters featuring Christina's description were produced and distributed widely. These included details about her last known clothing: white t-shirt, multi-colored shorts, and black tennis shoes, and were placed throughout Gila County and beyond. At a time before digital alerts and social media, these physical posters were one of the primary tools for generating public awareness. In an effort to encourage information from the public, Christina's family announced a reward of $10 for any credible tip that could lead to her location. This was a substantial amount for the time, and reflected both the seriousness of the situation and the family's determination to find answers. Reward incentives are often used in cases where traditional leads are limited, as they can motivate individuals who may have seen or heard something to come forward. Despite these combined efforts, rapid reporting, structured law enforcement response, widespread volunteer searches, and financial incentive, no confirmed leads emerged during the critical early phase of the investigation. There were no verified sightings, no physical evidence recovered, and no information that could establish a clear direction for investigators. From an analytical perspective, this early response demonstrates that the case was handled with urgency and attention from the outset. The lack of immediate results was not due to inaction, but rather the absence of actionable evidence. In missing person investigations, particularly those involving rural environments and limited witnesses, this combination can significantly hinder progress. The actions taken by Christina's family and community reflect a key reality of the case. From the very beginning, every reasonable effort was made to locate her. Law enforcement followed protocol, the community engaged actively, and resources were deployed quickly. Yet despite this, Christina Marie Plante could not be found. This initial phase set the tone for what would become a long-term investigation. A strong early response, but no answers. A coordinated effort, but no trace. And ultimately, a disappearance that would extend far beyond the expectations of anyone involved. In the hours and days following Christina Marie Plante's disappearance on May 15, 1994, authorities initiated a large-scale search operation that reflected both the urgency of the situation and the uncertainty surrounding her last known movements. Deputies from the Gila County Sheriff's Office coordinated efforts on the ground, supported by regional resources and an expanding network of volunteers from the local community. Search teams were deployed across the area surrounding Moonlight Drive in Star Valley, focusing on terrain that included forested zones, open land, and uneven mountain pathways typical of Gila County. These operations were systematic rather than random. Investigators mapped out probable routes Christina may have taken based on her stated intention to visit a nearby horse enclosure, then expanded outward in a grid-based pattern to ensure comprehensive coverage. Specialized resources were also introduced early in the search. Trained canine units were brought in to assist with scent tracking, a standard procedure in missing person cases where time is critical. These dogs are typically used to follow a subject's last known scent trail and identify potential directions of movement. However, in this case, the effectiveness of such methods was limited. Environmental factors, time delays, and the absence of a clearly defined trail reduced the ability to establish a reliable path. At the same time, ground search teams composed of both law enforcement personnel and civilian volunteers conducted coordinated sweeps of the surrounding area. These efforts included checking wooded areas, drainage zones, abandoned structures, and any location where a person might seek shelter or become disoriented. The scale of participation was significant, reflecting both community concern and the seriousness with which the case was being treated. Parallel to physical search efforts, investigators began an extensive interview process. Dozens of individuals were questioned, including neighbors, acquaintances, and anyone who might have been in the vicinity around the time of Christina's disappearance. The objective was to identify any unusual activity, unfamiliar vehicles, or interactions that could provide direction. Despite these efforts, no consistent or actionable witness account emerged. This absence of corroborated sightings became one of the defining challenges of the investigation. To expand awareness beyond the immediate area, authorities and family members worked together to distribute missing person flyers on a wide scale. These flyers included Christina's physical description, clothing details, and last known location, and were circulated not only within Arizona but across state lines. In the pre-digital era, this method was essential for reaching a broader audience and generating potential leads from outside the local region. As the initial search phase progressed without results, investigators were required to formally assess the nature of the case. Christina's disappearance was ultimately classified as missing and endangered under suspicious circumstances. This designation is typically applied when a minor is missing and the surrounding facts do not clearly indicate voluntary absence, yet also lack definitive evidence of a specific crime. It allows law enforcement to allocate additional resources and maintain the case at a higher priority level. In line with this classification, Christina's information was entered into national databases designed to track and identify missing persons. Her case was included in systems such as National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, LNOMUS, and National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. These platforms serve as centralized repositories, enabling coordination between agencies and increasing the likelihood that unidentified individuals or new information can be matched to existing cases over time. From an investigative standpoint, these early actions followed established protocol and demonstrated a comprehensive response. Search operations were extensive, interviews were conducted thoroughly, and the case was elevated to national visibility. However, despite the scale and structure of these efforts, the outcome remained unchanged. No confirmed trace of Christina Marie Plante was found. This phase of the investigation illustrates a critical reality in missing person cases. Even when response efforts are timely, organized, and resource-intensive, the absence of evidence can halt progress. In Christina's case, the initial search laid the groundwork for a long-term investigation, but it did not provide the answers investigators were seeking. In the initial stages of the investigation, as large-scale searches failed to produce physical evidence, attention gradually shifted towards smaller, more nuanced details. Fragments of information that, while not conclusive on their own, began to shape early interpretations of Christina Marie Plante's disappearance. One of the most frequently referenced points came from conversations Christina had reportedly shared with friends prior to May 15, 1994. According to these accounts, she had expressed thoughts about running away. At the time, such statements were not necessarily viewed as actionable threats. In adolescent contexts, expressions of wanting to leave or escape a situation can reflect emotional distress rather than a concrete plan. However, once she disappeared, these remarks took on greater significance. Investigators were required to consider whether these statements represented intent, preparation, or simply momentary frustration. Despite this, several factors complicated the theory of a voluntary departure. Christina was known to have a strong attachment to certain aspects of her daily life, particularly her horse. The fact that she left without making arrangements for the animal raised questions among both investigators and community members. In addition, she did not take her younger brother with her. Another detail that, for many, seemed inconsistent with the idea of a planned departure. These elements contributed to skepticism within the community, where many found it difficult to believe that she would leave abruptly without addressing these personal connections. At the same time, investigators noted the absence of indicators typically associated with external intervention. There were no signs of forced contact, no evidence suggesting a struggle, and no physical traces pointing to an accident along her presumed route. This lack of forensic evidence neither confirmed nor eliminated any single theory. Instead, it placed the case in a category where multiple possibilities remained open, each supported only by partial information. As days passed without resolution, informal speculation began to emerge within the community of Star Valley. Some believed she had left intentionally and managed to avoid detection. Others considered the possibility of an unknown external factor that left no visible trace. These discussions, while natural in the absence of answers, did not produce verifiable leads and were treated cautiously by investigators. From an analytical standpoint, this phase illustrates a common pattern in missing person cases. When physical evidence is limited, behavioral indicators and personal history take on increased importance. In Christina's case, early remarks about leaving provided a potential direction, but not a definitive explanation. Without corroborating evidence, they remained one piece of a much larger and unresolved puzzle. Following the initial search efforts in 1994, the case of Christina Marie Plante gradually transitioned into what investigators classify as a cold case. Between 1994 and approximately 2020, there were no major public developments. The case remained active in official records, but visible progress was limited. Most updates during the early years consisted of brief mentions in local media, particularly between 1994 and 1995, when the disappearance was still recent and public awareness remained relatively high. As time passed, the frequency of coverage declined. Without new evidence or confirmed sightings, the investigation entered a prolonged period of inactivity. This does not indicate that the case was abandoned, but rather that it lacked actionable leads. Like many long-term missing person cases, Christina's file persisted within law enforcement systems, periodically reviewed but without significant advancement. For her family and the community of Star Valley, the absence of updates created a sense of unresolved uncertainty that extended across decades. A structural shift occurred in the early 2020s with the establishment of a dedicated cold case unit within the Gila County Sheriff's Office. The formation of this unit reflected a broader trend in law enforcement, where agencies began allocating specific resources to re-examine older cases using modern methods. Christina Marie Plante's disappearance was among the cases selected for renewed review. The re-investigation process was methodical. Detectives began by reconstructing the original case from the ground up. This included a complete re-reading of archived reports, re-evaluation of initial assumptions, and identification of any inconsistencies or overlooked details. In long-term cases, even minor discrepancies can become significant when viewed through a modern analytical framework. In addition to document review, investigators sought to re-engage with individuals connected to the case. Former witnesses, acquaintances, and community members were re-interviewed where possible. The passage of time can alter memory, but it can also change willingness to speak. Individuals who were previously uncertain, unavailable, or reluctant may provide new perspectives when approached years later. While these interviews did not immediately produce definitive answers, they contributed to a broader contextual understanding of Christina's circumstances prior to her disappearance. A key component of the renewed investigation involved the integration of modern technology. As outlined in the official statement, detectives relied on advances in technology, modern investigative techniques, and detailed case review to develop new leads. Although specific methods have not been publicly disclosed, this category typically includes several established tools in contemporary cold case work. These may involve enhanced DNA analysis, including the ability to process smaller or previously unusable samples, the application of genetic genealogy, which allows investigators to identify individuals through familial DNA connections, and expanded access to digital and public records databases. Modern identity verification systems also enable cross-referencing across multiple jurisdictions, increasing the likelihood of identifying individuals who may be living under different names. It is important to note that while these tools are powerful, they are most effective when combined with traditional investigative work. In Christina's case, the breakthrough did not come from a single discovery, but from the convergence of multiple efforts. Archival review, renewed interviews, or technological application. Each element contributed to narrowing possibilities and identifying a viable lead. Ultimately, this process led to the confirmation of Christina Marie Plante's identity and status. After 32 years, the case transitioned from unresolved to resolved, not through the discovery of evidence from the past, but through the successful identification of her present. From an investigative perspective, this case illustrates both the limitations and potential of long-term inquiries. For decades, progress was constrained by the absence of evidence and the technological limitations of the time. However, with sustained effort and evolving methods, a case once defined by uncertainty was brought to a definitive conclusion. The timeline from 1994 to 2026 reflects a broader reality in cold case investigations. Resolution may not come quickly, but it remains possible when cases are preserved, revisited, and examined through new lenses. After more than 3 decades of uncertainty, the case of Christina Marie Plante reached a decisive turning point in late March to early April 2026. What had remained unresolved for 32 years was ultimately clarified through a combination of persistence, structured re-investigation, and modern investigative capabilities. According to information released by the Gila County Sheriff's Office, the breakthrough occurred when members of the cold case unit were able to establish direct contact with Christina. This contact marked the first confirmed interaction between law enforcement and the missing individual since her disappearance in 1994. From an investigative standpoint, this moment was critical, as it shifted the case from theoretical analysis to direct verification. Following this contact, investigators proceeded with identity confirmation. While specific methods were not publicly disclosed, authorities emphasized that the verification process met current evidentiary standards. This typically involves cross referencing multiple data points, which may include official records, biometric indicators, and other legally recognized forms of identification. The outcome was conclusive. Christina Marie Plante had been located, and her identity was confirmed with certainty. The official announcement was made between April 1 and April 2, 2026, through the department's public communication channels, including its Facebook page. The statement was concise but carried significant weight. It confirmed not only that Christina was alive, but also that her status as a missing person had been formally resolved. With that declaration, a case that had remained open for over 3 decades was officially closed. Sheriff Adam J. Shepard and his team acknowledged the importance of this outcome, both for the agency and for the broader context of cold case investigations. While the public statement remained measured and professional, it reflected a clear recognition of the rarity of such a resolution. Cases involving missing individuals over extended periods rarely conclude with the subject being found alive, making this outcome particularly significant. From an operational perspective, the success of this case can be attributed to 2 primary factors: sustained investigative effort and the integration of modern technology. The cold case unit's decision to revisit the file ensured that the case remained active rather than static. By re-examining historical records, reassessing prior assumptions, and maintaining organizational continuity, investigators preserved the polity of future resolution. At the same time, advances in investigative methods played a crucial role. Modern tools allow for more efficient data analysis, broader access to records, and improved identity verification processes. While authorities have not specified which exact technologies led to the breakthrough, they confirmed that, advances in technology, modern investigative techniques, and detailed case review were central to developing new leads. These tools enable connections that were possible in 1994, particularly when individuals may have changed names, locations, or identifying information over time. It is also important to recognize that this outcome was not the result of a single discovery. Rather, it emerged from the convergence of multiple investigative elements. The reactivation of the case, the application of updated methodologies, and the eventual establishment of contact all contributed to the final resolution. Each step built upon the previous one, illustrating the cumulative nature of long-term investigations. In conclusion, the resolution of Christina Marie Plante's case in 2026 represents a rare and significant example of a cold case reaching closure through identification rather than evidence recovery. It demonstrates that even after decades, cases can remain viable when supported by persistence and evolving investigative tools. While many details of her life during those 30 years remain undisclosed, the central question that defined the case, whether she was alive, has now been definitively answered. The confirmation in early April 2026 that Christina Marie Plante had been found alive generated a wide and immediate response, both locally Arizona and across national media. In communities such as Star Valley and Gila County, where the case had originated, the reaction was marked by a mixture of relief, disbelief, and reflection. For many residents, Christina's disappearance had long been part of the community's collective memory. The idea that she had been located alive after 32 years challenged assumptions that had solidified over time. While detailed statements from family members have not been publicly released, the resolution itself represents a form of closure that had been absent for decades. In missing person cases, uncertainty often becomes the most difficult burden for families to carry. Even without full disclosure of Christina's circumstances, the confirmation of her status provides a definitive answer to the central question that had remained unresolved since 1994. National media outlets, including CBS News, NBC News, People, and Fox News, reported on the case shortly after the official announcement by the Gila County Sheriff's Office. Coverage emphasized the rarity of the outcome. In most long-term missing person cases, resolution comes through identification of remains or legal closure without recovery. The fact that Christina was found alive positioned the case as an exception within national statistics. Beyond immediate reactions, the case carries broader implications for cold case investigations across the United States. Thousands of families continue to wait for answers regarding missing loved ones, many of whom disappeared decades ago, under similarly unclear circumstances. Christina Marie Plante's case introduces a renewed sense of possibility. It demonstrates that time, while a significant barrier, does not necessarily eliminate the potential for resolution. In recent years, advancements in forensic science have already reshaped the landscape of cold case work. Techniques such as genetic genealogy have led to breakthroughs in cases that remained unsolved for decades, including the identification of suspects in long-standing investigations. While Christina's case does not involve a criminal resolution, it operates within the same broader framework: the application of modern tools to historical cases. It highlights how evolving methods can produce outcomes that were previously unattainable. At the same time, the case underscores the importance of sustained institutional commitment. The creation of a cold case unit within the Gila County Sheriff's Office ensured that older cases were not permanently set aside. Without that structural decision, the opportunity to revisit Christina's case using modern techniques may not have occurred. This reinforces a key lesson for law enforcement agencies: maintaining active review processes is essential for long-term case viability. From a social perspective, the case also reframes how missing person narratives are understood. Public perception often assumes that long-term disappearances involve criminal acts or irreversible outcomes. While that is frequently the case, Christina's story illustrates that alternative explanations can exist. Her disappearance, now understood as voluntary, challenges earlier assumptions and emphasizes the need for careful, evidence-based interpretation in the absence of clear facts. Ultimately, the resolution of this case conveys a dual message. On one level, it offers hope, demonstrating that answers can emerge even after decades. On another level, it highlights the evolving nature of investigative work, where persistence and technology intersect to redefine what is possible. For families still waiting, the case does not guarantee similar outcomes, but it does affirm that unresolved cases are not necessarily beyond reach. The case of Christina Marie Plante represents a rare and compelling from disappearance to resolution. What began on May 15, 1994, as a quiet afternoon in Star Valley, a simple walk that ended without explanation, evolved into a decades-long mystery. For 32 years, her case remained open, defined by the absence of evidence and unanswered questions. Through sustained investigative effort by the Gila County Sheriff's Office and the application of modern techniques, that uncertainty was ultimately replaced with confirmation Christina was alive, and her identity had been verified. While many details of her life during those years remain private, the resolution itself provides a meaningful sense of closure. It allows both investigators and the community to move forward with clarity rather than speculation. Looking ahead, the focus shifts to Christina's well-being. After decades away from public view, her privacy and stability remain the priority. It is appropriate to extend respect for her choices and her continued safety, health, and peace in the life she has built. More broadly, this case delivers a powerful message. Even after 32 years, answers can still emerge. Time may complicate investigations, but it does not eliminate the possibility of resolution. In that sense, hope, however distant, remains.